Hello, MeG World. Welcome to the latest edition of the MeG Podcast. It's been about a month since we did the last one, so it seems a good time to do another one. This evening, the usual team of Richard Jeffrey Cook, Matt Haywood and myself are joined by Simon Stokes, who has appeared on a couple of episodes before, if I remember rightly. So good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So tonight's topic is going to be a bit of a delve into the 10th century. I had to think about that then, get my numbers right. The 10th century CE, or AD for those who prefer AD, in the British Isles, based around a specific battle, which I will let Richard introduce shortly, and the armies involved about it. We've invited Simon along because here at his club, Luton Lancers, isn't it, Simon?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, have put on this battle as a pretty big multiplayer game. So we thought we'd invite him to explain and tell us how it went, how they came up with the armies and the battle, anything they tweaked for it, and just generally tell us how it went. And hopefully everybody had fun. As well as that, Richard, myself, and Matt have also come up with what you might call standard MeG 10K armies for the usual, the more, I say usual, but it's only usual for those of us who do it, if you like, competition style games, just to see what we could come up with for that based on three of the armies involved. So we will go through those as well, and maybe have some bits of discussion about the period and the armies in general, as we normally do. So that's me just setting the scene. I will hand over to Richard to, as ever, inform us.
Thank you, Nick. So this evening's topic is the Battle of Brunanburh, which occurred in 937 and was between the King of the English, Aethelstan, and the kings of the Dublin Irish, Olaf Guthfrithson, and his allies, the Scots, who were led by a prince. Scotland, where Alba was under the rule of Constantine at that time, and Owen of Strathclyde, the kingdom of Strathclyde being sort of southern Scotland and Cumbria at this time. Anyway, I'll give you a bit of a background. So I'm going to start at 789, which is a long time earlier. But that was when the first Viking raids on England began. In 865, so about 70 years later, not quite, the great army of the Danes, the Danish Miserheer, invades England. And apologies for the pronunciations that are going to get worse when I have to give some Welsh names later on. Anyway, this leads to the kingdoms of Mercia falling in 875 and Northumbria in 876. And by 878, even Alfred has to flee within Wessex until he wins the Battle of Edington in 878. And through that, England gets divided between the invaders, who are contained within the region known as the Danelaw, which essentially follows Watling Street up and divided the country, with Mercia and Wessex to the south, with the Danes ruling everywhere to the north. Then, under Alfred's son, Edward the Elder, the Saxons start to fight back, and in 914 they sort of hold on to Buckingham. In 915 they take Bedford. In 916 they advance into Essex, and in 917, that's a really decisive year when the Danish armies of Northampton, Cambridge and East Anglia all submit to Edward. So at this point, only 4 of the 5 boroughs of East Mercia are holding out south of the Humber. In 918, Leicester, one of those 5 boroughs, is secured, and then Stamford and Nottingham both submit later that year. And that actually leaves only Lincoln, it is believed, to be the only sort of Danish territory south of the Humber. In 918, the Queen of Mercia, Aethelflaed, I'll probably pronounce that wrong, dies, and Edward secures all authority in Mercia. Up until that time, he technically only ruled in his own right, the West Saxons. But 3 of the Welsh kings who were subject to Mercia now give their allegiance to Edward. Also in 918, the Northumbrian Danes in York offer their allegiance to Edward. This is actually because the Norse-Irish Vikings have invaded, and they actually take York in 919. It's probably worth talking about the Kingdom of York at this time, because the Northumbrians had actually kept quite a lot of control, even with the Danes ruling York, or the Vikings ruling York rather. So Northumbria at this point is also quite an extensive kingdom, actually goes quite far up into what we would consider now Lothian in Scotland. So this is a sort of substantial part of the country. In 924, Edward dies. Edward was the son of Alfred the Great, and Aethelstan, his son, is accepted by the Mercians as king, but encounters some resistance in Wessex. And in fact, he's only actually crowned as King of Mercia and Wessex in September 925. Meanwhile, up further north in Scotland, we find there are 2 kingdoms. There's the Kingdom of Alba, or the Scots, which, as I mentioned previously, is ruled by Constantine, who's been ruling since, I think, 900 and is now quite old. And then, as just further to the south and the west, is the Kingdom of Strathclyde, which is actually a Brythonic kingdom. So like the Welsh and the Cornish, is actually a post-Roman British kingdom, not Scots or Pict. So back in York, at this time, Sihtric is ruling the Kingdom of York. And in 926, Aethelstan pulls off a bit of a diplomatic coup, I think, by agreeing for his sister to actually marry Sihtric. And rather conveniently, the following year, Sihtric dies. Now, one of Sihtric's cousins, a chap called Guthric, who is ruler of Dublin, so he's Norse-Irish, he tries to move across and take the throne of York, but Aethelstan actually prevails. We don't think they actually fought a battle, but essentially Aethelstan takes over the Kingdom of York. Not without some opposition, it has to be said. Even the Saxons in Northumbria were not particularly keen on this arrangement, because the south had never really ruled the north of England up until this point. So, however, by pulling off this sort of takeover, Aethelstan actually gets recognised by Constantine, King of Alba, Owen Strathclyde, King of Strathclyde, the Saxons in Northumbria, and by the Welsh King Huwdda of Deheubarth. And I hope those, apologies to any Welsh listeners, they basically all recognise Aethelstan as overlord. And so for the first time in British history, with the exception of Caithness, which is ruled by the Jarls of Orkney, the entire British mainland has a single overlord. Not even the Romans achieved that. So that's not bad record from 878, where they were about to get wiped out. The West Saxon line of Alfred now rules the entire British mainland. And this
not
really
bad. Not bad at all, it must be said.
This really sets up the whole situation from which the battle eventually develops. So not all of it is simple sailing, it has to be said. In 934, Athelstan and Constantine actually get into some sort of dispute. We're not really clear what actually happened, but Athelstan decides he has to invade Scotland and actually marches as far north as Dunatar, which is, I think, getting on towards Aberdeenshire, if I'm not mistaken. It's a long way north anyway. And apparently the English fleet, because this is an invasion by land and sea, raids as far as Caithness. Whatever happened, Constantine actually submits without a fight and recognises Aethelstan again as overlord. But it shows that things aren't necessarily all happiness and light. When has that been the case with England and Scotland?
It is.
Anyway,
Richard, sorry, just off the back of that, because you've got Aethelstan. Sorry, it is Aethelstan, isn't it?
Aethelstan, yes.
Who is overlord of this large British kingdom. Obviously, if Constantine revolt, how much actual power do you think he had over people like Constantine?
Well, in the charters, and there are charters from this period.
Oh, right.
Essentially, if required, he had to pay attendance on his overlord. So he had to travel all the way down to England if Aethelstan required it. Also, if required to, he was obliged to supply troops. Yes, internal. I think in internal affairs, I think Constantine pretty much could do what he liked, but those were the main obligations, along with giving suitably generous gifts. So that's taxation by another method, basically.
Yeah. So in an earlier period that I'm more familiar with, so the Roman Empire, they'd be called client kings, wouldn't they? The way we tend to describe them.
Yeah, I think it's a similar sort of arrangement.
Yeah. Sorry, it struck me that because, as you say, if Aethelstan was overlord of pretty much the entire mainland British Isle, mainland Britain, not Ireland, it would. Yeah, just wondering how much power he had. Anyway, back to you, Richard. Sorry, I was interrupting.
Right. So so we reached 934, and I'm happy to say AD because we're talking about Britain, which is by now a largely Christian country, at least from the West Saxon and Anglo mercenary point of view. Over in Ireland, Guthric dies. So Olaf Guthric, who is the son of Guthric, he succeeds his father as Norse King of Dublin. Now, at this time, the kings of Dublin are also overlords of the Kingdom of the Isles, which is the sort of Isle of Man and the Hebrides as well. Now, it actually takes him until 937 for Olaf Guthrum to convince all his other Viking rivals that he is the true and just king of Dublin. But he then basically sets out on this expedition to retake the Kingdom of York. And in this enterprise, he has basically recruited Owen of Strathclyde and Constantine, King of Alba, the Scots. So the conventional story is that Olaf sails across the Irish Sea to meet up with Constantine and Owen, and a huge battle is fought in the Wirral, and in that battle Aethelstan is victorious, and archaeology has even uncovered what appears might be a battlefield in Wirral near the town of Brunanburh. And if you want to know more about that, then go to YouTube, look up Battle of Brunanburh, and look for Dan Snow's History Hit YouTube video. And that will give you all nice pictures of spearheads and clearly ironworking and other and a few bits of weapons that they've recovered from the archaeology. However, all is not necessarily what it seems. There are a few problems. First off is that various sources, most notably John of Worcester's Chronicle of 1122, but also other chronicles in the 13th century, actually say that Olaf actually sailed into the Humber, not the Dee or the Mersey, which is, if you're going to invade via the Wirral, would seem the obvious place to sail to. So that's a slight problem. The second problem is the association of Brunanburh with Brunanburh. Now, over the past 200-300 years, there have been probably over 40 different sites proposed for Brunanburh. So there've been a lot of suggestions of where the battle might have taken place. The problem is Brunanburh is actually not attested in the Domesday Book, and the name actually only appears for the first time in the 12th century. Another problem is that the name, which is supposed to be Bruna's fort, Burh being the Saxon word for a fort, as in Burgle Heidage, which was a Saxon system of defences. Well, apparently Brunanburh might actually mean Brown Fort, not Bruna's fort. So that's a sort of slight issue. Now, the other thing is that the Anglo-Saxon chronicles, and we have manuscripts going back to, I think, 13th century, probably earlier. There are three main copies of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle known as manuscripts A, B, and C. Now, in manuscript B and C, the Brunanburh is spelt with a double N, so it's Brunanburh, not a single N. And in manuscript A, it's spelt with a single N, but then the scribe has actually put an extra N above, almost correcting his spelling mistake. Now, this is quite significant, but because in early Anglo-Saxon language, that changes the meaning of the name Brunanburh to actually mean fort with a spring, because Bruna with a double N is the Saxon word for a spring, as in water bubbling up out of the ground spring, just to be clear.
Not a big metal spring.
No. So another problem is that, or possibly a help, is that Simeon of Durham actually gives an alternative name for the battle as Weondune. Now, in Saxon, dune basically means a big hill, something like a ridge that stands out on the landscape. And the problem is the Wirral doesn't really have any whoppingly big hills. Wyn is the first part of it, is the name of the hill, obviously. Now, we'll come back to that in a minute. Another problem is that having been defeated, Olaf doesn't return to Ireland until Easter 938. So that's over. Now, the battle is supposed to have been fought probably in late October or early November in 937. So this is sort of 4 or 5 months later. Now, if he was defeated on the Wirral, that's a bit of a puzzle, because the obvious thing would be to immediately sail back to Dublin. Whereas if he had actually sailed into the Humber, then it starts to make a lot more sense, because sailing back to Ireland in midwinter across the north of Scotland is not a journey that you're likely to take. Even the Vikings, who were very adept at sailing across the north of Scotland and down the coast to Ireland, probably didn't try and tackle that journey in the middle of winter. So again, it just poses more questions. So Michael Wood, Professor Michael Wood, who's done a lot of investigation into the reign of Athelstan, he has actually come up with a possible alternative site for the battle. And this is actually on the A1, near where the A1 crosses the River Went. And the River Went is a Yorkshire river, and Weondune actually could be Saxon for Went Hill. And it so happens that where the A1 crosses the River Went, there's a whopping great big hill that still exists, as you'd not be surprised to know, to this day. And if you drive up the A1, you can see, as you're crossing the River Went, this whopping great big hill in front of you. Now, it's also an interesting possibility, because at that point on the A1, there is actually an old Roman fort. And within that fort, there's actually a spring, Robin's Hood Spring, believe it or not, it's called. And it's actually well renowned as being a spring going back to quite ancient times. The other piece of supporting evidence is actually the A1 is the main invasion route if you're coming from Scotland to invade England. Going through Lancashire was not the typical route that the Scots and Strathclyde Britons would have taken. So Professor Wood's theory, and there is a YouTube video, again, if you look up the Society of Antiquaries and look for Michael Wood and Brunanburh, you will come across this YouTube video where he presents his case. He's not saying for certain that's where the battle was. He's just saying it's an interesting alternative. So maybe the Battle of Brunanburh basically took place at this location, which happens to be at the sort of southern edge of the Kingdom of York, as it was around that sort of time. The boundary varied somewhat, but it's in that sort of border area. So, I mean, the significance of the battle was that it was a great battle. All the sources, the earliest source we have on the battle is from 980, and in that it describes how in the 13th year of Aethelstan, a gigantic battle at Brunanburh called the Great Battle was fought, and Aethelstan himself drove the barbarians from the shores of Britain. A bit of an exaggeration, but everybody likes a good tale. It certainly was a very hard fought battle. The Scots, one of the princes of Scotland was actually apparently killed in the battle, and there was a great slaughter as described in the Anglo-Saxon chronicle poem of the battle. The effect of the battle was to secure Aethelstan's position as overlord. That wasn't to mean that was to be uncontested, as even within 15-20 years there were threats to the rule of the Anglo-Saxon kings, and obviously in the subsequent 70 odd years later, the Danes indeed invade and under Canute conquer England and establish the Anglo-Danish Empire. But it was certainly a significant battle, and I find it an interesting one from the history point of view, and how you need to challenge the conventional view on these things.
Thank you, Richard.
I'm just going to say that presentation by Michael Wood is really good. He's a very engaging speaker, and he does a damn good job on that.
Yeah,
far better than I do.
I will follow Richard's advice and search for the Dan Snow history hit video. So we will include the URL for that in the notes that go with this. And I have seen the Michael Wood talk, the Society of Antiquaries.
Antiquaries.
Antiquaries, yes. It's one of those words. It's a strange word, isn't it? It's one of those stumble over. Matt's no doubt laughing, but we'll get him back to Cantabrian at some point, so we can take the mick out of him once again on that. He's an incredibly good speaker, and it's well worth a listen. So we'll also have the link to that, and whilst I'm searching for those, if I find anything else useful on that. So that's fascinating. And actually, when you were talking there about the Michael Wood's ideas on an alternative site, I was just looking on Google Maps where the A1 crosses the River Went, and realised I have driven that part of the A1 so many times.
Well, you'll be looking for the hill now, won't you?
Yeah, next time I go up there, wherever that is, I will be, because basically it's a little bit south of Pontefract. If assuming there aren't multiple River Wents, and I've picked the wrong one. So yeah, it's sort of between Pontefract and Doncaster, really. So that's astonishing, just the number of times I must have driven past that. It's sort of vaguely related. It's like going up the M6 toll road, where you pass within a few hundred meters of where the Staffordshire hoard was found, and I reckon I drove past when they were excavating it, and you can see the field from the road. But until that was announced, it wouldn't cross your mind. Anyway, just so that's a digression about me driving up motorways, really. So thank you. But I would certainly advise anybody who's listening to this actually, even if the period of history isn't a big thing, listening to especially the Michael Wood talk, he is such a good communicator. He just takes you through it and explains stuff And it's almost taking you through gently, I found, on that one, and builds you up as to why he thinks this is a potential different battle site. Anyway, so Richard sort of set a scene about it now. As said at the beginning, Simon and the Luton Lancers Club have refought this. So I think maybe hand over to Simon just to go through how they decided to do it, based on the information you had. So Simon, really over to you.
Yeah. So we've got a lot of history in terms of our interest in Dark Age, early medieval games. So our late gaming buddy John Keeling was a reenactor, and in fact, this was the last game that we actually did with him before he passed away. So it was kind of like the culminations of a whole bunch of big battles. Essentially, there was a book that came out by Michael Livingston, the Osprey book about Brunanburh, presenting the Wirral idea and the case for Wirral. And at the same time, you also had a bit of fiction in terms of the last Bernard Cornwell book from his Last Kingdom series, which was set basically around the Battle of Brunanburh. And there was an article in Medieval Warfare, all themed around Brunanburh and Athelstan. And so that kind of gave a little prompt to say, actually, there's probably enough information in there now to have a stab at actually refighting this. And I think what you have to do is you have to pick one description, one theory for how the battle was fought and where it was fought, and then run with it. Because if you try to kind of blend in all the different ideas, you just get horribly confused. So we picked the Michael Livingston approach, and essentially is that this was they came across the Irish Sea after a period in Ireland where he was putting down kind of local lords. So it's fairly late in the season, and the theory that he puts forward is that actually the bulk of the army all turns up by ship. Yeah. So that's our initial premise. Yeah. So that most of the army will be infantry. We allowed a little bit of cavalry from the Scots and from the Strathclyde, because I thought that was reasonable to do, to add a little bit of cavalry in there. And essentially, this is a battlefield that is agreed by both parties, and the Anglo-Saxons, by all accounts, seem to get there first, and they choose an area to set up where they've effectively got two secure flanks. So down one side, there's a low hill with a wood on it, and down the other side, there is this thing called the Clatterbrook, which is a kind of stream with reeds and things around it. And they, by all accounts, they seem to set up between those two secure flanks, and then await the Viking Strathclyde Scots alliance to come down and attack them. Essentially, this is the big battle that both sides want, because they want to actually decide it.
Can I just mention that idea about the battlefield is based on Egil's saga,
yes,
which is an Icelandic saga which was written in Old Norse between 1220 and 1240. I'm reading this off Wikipedia. in case anybody's wondering. But that's the only account of the battle that contains any information about the topography.
Yeah.
Some historians would argue that it's invented rather than based on a reliable narrative. But if you haven't got anything else, then it seems reasonable to go with it.
Yes, I think that was the position we were in. Is that you pick a narrative and stick with it, and it seemed to make sense in terms of the battle layout and the different troops. So essentially, the way that we approached it was that we had 3 sections of the table. Okay. And it was 12-foot long table, 5-foot wide, and
a big battle.
A
big battle. Ken Riley, the Yorkshire game, would be proud of you.
Except that he doesn't do like Dark Age. He doesn't get Dark Age.
he might have if he'd convinced him it was in Yorkshire.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Anyway, sorry. Once again, I'm interrupting your flow. Please go on.
Yeah. So essentially, what we've got the on the Anglo-Saxon side. So we've got Athelstan, and Athelstan, we gave him effectively the pick of the troops from Wessex. So we figured he would have come up with his with his herdmen, with the Sleckford, and so he's got a smallish but really quite good force. Okay, so Athelstan's half brother Edmund, we gave him the men from Mercia. So they're effectively the third. So they're lots and lots of spearmen, basically.
And bit of a theme, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. And then on the other flank, we put in Vikings, because there was again, according to the saga, there's a Viking mercenary contingent. Yeah. So these are Vikings, probably Danes, we think, possibly Norse, that were fighting in the employ of Athelstan. On the other side, again, we've got 3 armies. So we've got Constantine with his Scots. We've got Owain with his Strathclyde, and then we've got Olaf or Anlaf. Again, different accounts spelled differently. With his Norse Irish. Okay. And we stuck fairly closely to the MeG army list. A couple of little changes in there, but those are effectively the 3 battles, if you like, on both sides. So
is it a question? How in, if you like, in MeG army terms, how big were each of the contingents?
Each of them is a 10,000 point army.
Oh, so we're talking about a 30k.
Yeah,
game. That's a 30k aside, not 30k in total. Ooh, it's even bigger. Sorry, I'd misunderstood your description to me.
Yeah, if I see if I can share a picture.
Yeah. Again, for the listeners, Simon has kindly sent me the lists and a picture of the battlefield as they laid it out, which we will include on the blog for you as illustration, so you can see what the guys chose to include in the armies for this particular refight.
Okay, right, here we go. Some of you guys can see it. That's how the battle looked. Oh,
and then so of course, yeah. Once again, visuals over podcast. Oh, it makes great radio.
I'll pop a link to it in the thing. So you can see there. Effectively, we've got on the right hand side, we've got the Saxons, and then on the left hand side, because we're looking kind of down the length of the table. We've got the North Irish, then we've got the Strathclydes, and then we've got the Scots. Okay. So the way that it worked out, so we effectively played it like 3 separate battles, but using one camp that was shared between all of the armies, and a deck for each one. In actual fact, that's how we were meant to play it. There were a couple of guys dropped out, so we actually did it as 2 separate 15,000 point games in the end.
Oh, okay.
But that works out pretty well. So basically, you just align at the end of the turn. Once one side finishes, they wait for the other side to finish as well.
Okay,
and the way that we.
So I was going to say, is it that the absolute end of the turn, or did you go through like a movement phase, stop, shooting, stop, or just let the 2 parts of the game go?
Typically, we let the 2 parts go. The only little wrinkle is at the point where the 2 tables join. If there's something that is crossing, then you have to align at the end of the phases. Yeah.
Okay, that's sort of just negotiate it as it happens.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, but otherwise, just play at your own speed.
Yeah. So that's the way we approached it. It's a typical MeG battle then. Yeah. And the way that the battle actually developed was we had the Scots and the Vikings going at it in the woods, and so we had Rob was playing his Scots, and he was pushing his Galwegian through the woods, and that was a pretty fierce battle. There was lots of skulls and death and going on. In the centre, this is the battle of the shield walls, where effectively you've got the Anglo-Saxon Mercian Fyrd taking on Owain and his spearmen. Yeah. And then on the flank that we've got Athelstan and Anlaf, that was effectively all the best troops. But we had with the Irish, we tried to make use of the stream and put the Irish in the stream because they had some loose formation troops in there. Okay. A couple of little things that we actually put into the rules. Obviously, with a lot of shield wall troops in there, trying to actually break into that shield wall, and particularly with the third where you've got this kind of mixed front rank as being Slechtford and the back rank being the Great Fyrd. Then if you can get past those first couple of ranks, then you get into what we call the squishy middle. So there's a little technique that we used for the game, which was the boar's head. Yeah. So what that was, a little extra rule. I think I mentioned it last time I was on, where if you pay a red or an upgraded yellow to charge, then you can choose one file of your close order infantry to be the boar's head, and then they get dev charger for that turn. Yeah.
Okay. Even against shield wall?
Well, they get the dev charger bonus, yeah.
Okay, but not the shatter effect.
Not the shatter, exactly.
Okay, so it's a big +2 charge bonus.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So,
plus we mixed in some. Again, these are on in the list. So you've got the berserkers. So they're available to the North Irish. I think historically, there probably weren't that many berserkers, but we put them in there.
Perhaps one Richard to comment on.
You're muted, Richard.
Richard, your mic's off.
Sorry. Yeah,
the classic business meeting.
Indeed. Yeah, berserkers are fun. They probably didn't exist in huge numbers, but I'm not going to stop any wargamer who wants a bit of berserker action from having it.
So essentially, the way the game panned out was the centre was a stalemate. The Athelstan versus Anlaf battle was kind of a bit to and fro, but what really won it for the Anglo-Saxons was the fact that the Vikings actually made a mess of the Scots in the end, and then effectively turned that flank. And even though the Owain, the Strathclyde had some reserves that we tried to push in, it wasn't enough, and basically they completely rolled up the centre, and then the game was done.
So it was a great battle with a great slaughter. Yeah. So how long did it take to play it out?
We did it a day. So the way that we work is that the place that we play is a guide hut, and so John's wife runs the guys there, and we set up the night before. So pop down, set up all the figures, all the terrain, and then we start the next morning when everyone else turns up. So had that luxury to set up, because setting up that many figures takes a while, and you've got lots of people hanging around, not doing very much. Setting up the night before really helps, because people just turn up and we're done. We can start now.
Great. And if you got the whole day.
We were done by about 4 o'clock, and then in the pub by 5. So it was good.
Yeah, but also I suppose no rush as well. So that sounds fantastic. I've got I guess one question. As you know, I've sort of indicated earlier on, this period isn't a period that sets my soul alight for whatever reason. Possibly because I just imagine it as two very similar armies going at each other. And when you got that many, was there enough variety to be interesting?
I think there was with the different allies, because the Scots, and you possibly see the Scottish list that I forwarded on, and I noticed that whoever did the Scots list that you forwarded on, you got lots of Galwegians. They're always
spoiler.
Yeah. So they're kind of they're dev charger and melee expert, but unprotected. So you've got those, and if as we did, we had those herring through the woods, that gave another little added bit to it.
Yeah, there is basically saying there is enough variety. If you've got allies, definitely. So you're not just stuck with two absolutely same armies, and then just becomes a dice rolling competition.
Yeah, I mean, in this particular battle, we gave the Scots had a bit of cavalry, the Strathclyde had a bit of cavalry.
Yeah,
but because of the kind of restricted nature of the frontage, we found that it was actually quite difficult to use the cavalry. Rob had difficulty trying to get them in, have enough space to actually use them, which I think it's probably says more about this particular battle than it does, the period in general. Yeah.
Actually, since you mentioned cavalry, So this might be just diverting off for a bit, possibly for yourself and Richard. Although obviously, if Matt got any thoughts, he can chip in. Is how much cavalry was there around at the time? Because I'm aware that there is, I don't know if it's a controversy or suggestions that maybe the armies in Britain weren't as infantry based or wholly infantry based as we sometimes think, and that basically there was more cavalry, especially in the upper echelons, where a warrior would be an all-round warrior. He would have a horse, he'd be able to ride, he'd be able to fight on that. And this idea of, especially the Anglo-Saxons being infantry, it's almost projecting Hastings backwards. And Hastings, after all, was a single battle. So I don't know if especially yourself and Richard, have got any thoughts on that?
A lot of Anglo-Saxons would have, certainly the wealthier Saxons would have rode to the battlefield. In terms of actually fighting mounted, however, they definitely did do it on occasion, but that it seems to be very much the exception rather than the rule. And yeah, there is a Slingshot article of probably 15 years ago now, which summarizes the evidence for Saxons fighting mounted. But it's rare, and particularly at this period, there isn't a lot of evidence for it occurring. It occurs more in the late 10th, early 11th century.
Okay, so yeah, and okay, that's the Anglo-Saxons. I've got this vague feeling about maybe the British using more cavalry, so that might apply to Strathclyde.
Yes, so we had basically skirmish cavalry, so they're kind of javelin armed. Skirmish cavalry is the predominant. We gave the Scots a unit of a tug of spear armed cavalry as well.
So, but it's just okay, so you say the consensus is still it's pretty much an infantry warfare environment. Perhaps that's why Indeed. I don't like it. No horse archers.
Right.
So, Matt, have you anything you want to ask about the battle in particular, or Simon's club's refight?
Just a technical question of how much they had to reinforce the table, given the amount of 28mm lead they must have had. Very impressive in the photos.
Yeah, it was. These were just the fold down tables that we that you order from any internet retailer.
Without naming the obvious one. So, but no figure casualties, no table collapsing.
Not here, no.
Excellent. So, yeah, I've got inevitably, I always have a couple of list questions for Richard at this point. He's going, oh no, not again. It was when looking for the army list for this question. I think what one was to do with the Anglo-Saxon army. Simon mentioned there about they included a Viking contingent on the Anglo-Saxon side, which presumably was based off the Icelandic Chronicle. Simon?
Yes. Yeah.
And if I'm right, our list doesn't allow Viking allies. I
think there is a argument for the Middle Anglo-Saxon list needing some work. Let's put it like that. I mean, there's no opportunity to have a Welsh overlord contingent for Athelstan, for example, as well. I think I would argue the use of Viking mercenaries is more likely to be in the herd element of the list rather than perhaps being a separate ally or anything like that. But yes, the the Middle Anglo-Saxon list could possibly be improved that way.
Okay, that's plenty to go. Just one. It did cross my mind, obviously, with the point you made about the Icelandic saga being quite a late source. Whether that was the reason, or so maybe there'd be the odd unit within the army rather than an allied contingent. I
think the herd would have been recruited from any available fighting source, and that would have included Danes. So you could have had Danes from the region under the Danelaw fighting for Aethelstan, or you could have had mercenaries. I was reading only today, actually, a suggestion that 6th, 7th century Anglo-Saxons were actually fighting as mercenaries for the Byzantines.
I saw something about that as well today.
Suggests that have spear, will fight for pay. You could travel quite a long way, because I think traditional view would be that the idea of Anglo-Saxons fighting for pay in the Byzantine Empire would have been laughed at a few years ago.
So at that date, so they're talking 6th, 7th century for that one,
Indeed.
aren't they? Yeah, so that's and I think it's probably a reminder that I think there's a lot of evidence these days about even somewhere that had been on the edge of the Roman Empire was still actually quite connected to the Mediterranean world. I think it goes back to this idea of the Dark Ages weren't as dark as was once portrayed. Anyway, my other army list question was early Scots one, and again it's to do with Vikings. It's to do with the Allied contingent, because because we have the list does allow a specific combination of allies for this single year, one of which is Dublin Irish allies, which we've got as a Viking contingent rather than a Norse Irish contingent.
Indeed, in fact, you could equally argue that it ought to be a Norse Irish army with Scots and Strathclyde allies rather than the way we currently have it.
Okay, so am I getting a feeling that a number of the lists in the Britain PDF could possibly do with updating in the light of more recent research?
It is possible, but as you know, we're not doing any army list changes for the moment.
Absolutely, yes. So even if I was thinking of doing one, I would have to wait for some future time.
I might, however, make recommendations if people want to play friendly games.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm going to say, just as a little anecdote, there was, in terms of showing how connected the worlds were, there was one of the Anglo-Saxon commanders, Alfgar, who was effectively one of the local commanders, and he was one of the first to actually meet the Vikings and try and give them some sort of battle. There's almost like this kind of preliminary battle, and he loses really badly, and runs away. But gets kind of picked up by Athelstan, and goes back to it in terms of the main battle. And then when he engages with the Vikings again, he loses again really badly, and he runs away. But effectively, he doesn't stop running until he reaches France.
Okay. He really didn't like that second beating.
No, exactly. I think having run away twice, I don't think his prospects would have been very good.
Yeah.
That would be quite an achievement in those days.
Okay. Thanks for that. Okay, so I think maybe if we just segue now into the armies the three of us have drawn up for this from the army lists in the Britain book, and maybe this is time to ask Matt to kick us off with this. partly because he's been quiet, and I just want to get him to talk now.
You want to make sure I haven't fallen asleep.
So yeah, and come on, we always love Matt's armies.
Well, I don't think this one's too daft, actually, for me. There's no cavalry to fight in the woods that Simon was talking about earlier.
So, it's a sort of mirror part of that, you know. And anyway, so we're going to cover just three of the armies that were involved in the battle, but as, if you like, more standard 10,000 point MeG armies. But I think we have designed them based on the year 937. So it's within the context of the battle and fighting other armies of the time. So Matt, over to you, I think, to introduce your army choice.
Right. Well, yes, I went Norse Irish, and I included the Viking ally, but basically because that covers both feet in the camp, as it were. It's either a Viking army or it's a Norse Irish army. So I went with 50-50 pretty much, as it worked out in composition. So I won't go through the entire the list for it. I will give you the army list I created, because the Irish list has a fair few options. So I started with a legend. Sorry, go on, Nick.
I was going to say, no problem. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so I started with a legendary instinctive, because I thought, it deserves a legendary, basically. No other reason. So legendary instinctive was C&C, army commander. A Viking ally who was talented instinctive, because again, as half the damn army was going to be Viking, I thought, I'd like a fighting chance of them actually fighting. Competent instinctive and a mediocre instinctive. So that gave you a total of 14 command cards, which seemed reasonable to me. It's an unfortified camp, ended up with a PBS of 7 and a scouting of 2, which, considering it's an instinctive general and there is no mounted in the army, was not.
You were never going to get a lot of scouting, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And actually, PBS of 7 is better than you usually get with most instinctive armies with no cavalry. So, I'll take it.
It's better than the one I'll be describing shortly.
Yeah. So, let's start with the ally, the Viking ally. For the period, there are actually two choices. You can either go with the almost the Anglo-Danish style of close order foot with two-handed cut and crush, or you can go the more raider style, which are formed flexible. So I've gone with the formed flexible. So what you've ended up with is 4 units, which are a mix of Huskarls and a mix of herds. As long as you don't take more than 12 Huskarls, you can mix the compulsory herd with the Huskarls. So unit 1 ends up being 3 Huskarls. Sorry, so the Huskarls are infantry, formed flexible, superior, protected, two-handed cut and crush. The herd are infantry, formed flexible, average, protected, short spear. And as we were discussing berserkers earlier, there are also some berserkers. Now they are formed flexible, superior, protected, dev chargers, and melee expert. In the Viking list, you can swap herd or Huskarls for up to 4 bases of them. So I've taken the full 4, obviously, because I've denuded the Scandinavian peninsula of all its psychotics.
We would expect nothing else from you.
Absolutely.
If you haven't got any cavalry to put in the wood, have some Scandinavian nut jobs.
Absolutely. You read my mind. It didn't take long, I'm sure. So anyway, Tug 1 is Viking Huskarls, 3 bases worth. You then add in 2 bases of berserkers, and then you add in 4 bases of herd. So basically, it's a 9 block where 2/3 of them, almost, not quite, are superior, either dev charge, melee experts, or two-handed cut and crush. So a fairly crusty exterior to some reasonably solid back foot. The second tug is identical, so another block of 9. Then tugs 3 and 4 are 3 Huskarls and 3 herd, but they all have integral shooters. So it's 2 blocks of 6. Half of them are superior to handed cut and crush integral shooters, and half of them are short spears integral shooters. I'll get around to why I did that in a moment. And then we get into the Irish contingent. So that was 4 out, and I've just realised I can't count looking at my list. I've jumped from 4 to 6. So my army hug total is actually 10, which is not ideal. I'll have to come back to that. Anyway, all right, so my first mistake. Anyway, you have the standard Norse Irish without any upgrade foot, and they are infantry, tribal, loose, average, unprotected, experienced javelin, short spear, fleet of foot, all in 8s, 5 blocks of them. I have absolutely no intention of coming out of rough if I can get rough in them, because yeah, they're not going to last that long in a stand-up fight. You can upgrade them to two-handed cut and crush, but they lose the experienced javelin and they lose the fleet of foot. And frankly, unprotected two-handed cut and crush in what is essentially for a early Middle Ages, early Middle Ages. What do I mean? Dark Ages. Let's leave it at Dark Ages. Theme. They're going to be facing shield wall and protected warriors, and that two-handed cut and crush is really not going to do them much good, particularly if they're underprotected. So lose them as tribal loose with experienced javelins, and hopefully shoot you before you kill me. So there were five blocks of warriors in 8s, and then one block of Norse Irish nobles and retainers who are form flexible, superior protected two-handed cut and crush integral shooters. My list says 11. It actually turns out it's 10 tugs, so a slight tweak will have to be done there, because a break of 4 tugs is not going to work with that army. It needs to be 5, so I'd have to possibly use the
it will be 5 with 10 tugs. What you've not
it has done the math right. Yes, it hasn't gone on my wonky count. It's actually gone with.
It goes off the army builder goes off the actual number of them. You can number them pretty much anything, or put letters in.
Well done to Richard for understanding that the basic wargamer can't count, add, do anything.
It's a devil of a formula.
but it works.
Yeah. Wargamer equals technology fails. Yeah,
but there is one instance where it doesn't work, which is if you actually fill out every line in the spreadsheet. I believe, or every tug line in the spreadsheet, then it may get it wrong, I believe. But
there's a challenge for somebody. Anyway, so it does break on 5.
So it does break on 5 at the moment. I want it to break on 6 ideally. But anyhow, and then we get onto the skirmishers, which are the compulsory levies, which are infantry skirmishers, poor, unprotected, experienced javelin, combat shy. There is a sug of 9 and a sug of 6. I've then taken the average experienced bow skirmishers, which is 6, which is the maximum I think you're allowed, and the 6 slingers as well, also experienced average. So there's a small bit of shooty to add to the large amount of warriors throwing experienced javelins. The slings and the archers just give you a bit more range, which is always helpful. It just annoys people that are for longer, basically. And that's it, really. I forgot to say that the competent instinctive general was actually an internal ally as well. So in my working of the list, he's got 2 blocks of the warriors and 1 of the levy, which he doesn't actually have to have, but it's useful if he dies and he's lost both warriors. He can still be there for throwing cards away. Yeah, that's it. Basically, the Vikings are designed basically to hurt things as much as possible. The 9s are pretty robust. The 6s with the integral shooters are actually there to intermingle into the 9s, so that if I can hold them and somebody charges me, the thought I had in my mind was putting the berserkers either side of the integral shooter tugs. Simply, if it's your turn and you can do the dev charges first, you might get a shatter. The superior Huskarls with the integral shooters, assuming they're standing, are already on +3. You add another +2 for the shatter, it's +5, depending on what your opponent's throwing into that. You might be throwing reds, or you might be throwing red whites, so it might help that way. And I went with 2 6s rather than 1 block of a bigger block of 9. I was paying for a talented general, and as I say, I wanted 2 smaller blocks to actually sit 2 wide in the gaps. There you go.
Yeah, and they're formed, so
yes, and they're all formed. Yes.
Okay, cool. Is this one where you'd be looking to smear a certain amount of terrain on the table, especially for the Irish contingent?
Oh, I'd want rough going or rough going hills if I could get it. I don't want any cover particularly, as I suspect there wouldn't be much call for it. And It's almost got oddly, it's very similar to the Aztec army I run in, where there's an absolute bucket load of foot shooters that really don't want to fight anybody, but are sufficiently big. But as long as you can, get enough javelins thrown, it can make quite a lot of a mess. And 4 blocks of actually hard-hitting troops. So.
Yeah. Okie dokie. Well, should we ask our guest what he thinks of this one?
Yeah, I quite like that. It's like you say, it's something a little bit different. It's actually not too dissimilar to one of the lists that we did in the battle. So the Norse Irish. So we had fewer Irish, but yeah, not too dissimilar. Like you say, it's. I think one of the things with these army lists is that you don't get very many options for shooters. You're limited to a few SUGs. So if you can maximise the amount of shooters that you've got, that actually gives you another string to your bow. That's
for those who have that advanced technology of the bow, all 6 bases of them in this particular army. Yeah, it is true. Actually, I think the lists in the Britain book are not overburdened with shooters. So, yeah, Richard.
Yeah, it's I'm not sure I'd go for it, but I don't like the large numbers of the unprotected fleet of foot. But I can see it's a sort of army Lance Flint would go for.
Oh yes,
like though he'd want an extra 5 tugs somehow.
A mere 5 extra. Yes, it would be a very Lance army, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So listeners may want to trawl back through the blog posts that have got competition lists on them and try and find Lance's armies in there. You'll see what we mean by that. He likes his large mass armies.
He does indeed.
Yeah. I can see exactly where you're coming from on this one, Matt. I think if I was doing a Norse Irish, I'd possibly look for something similar. I think actually, if I was doing this army, I might want to do the Viking with the Norse Irish ally.
Yeah,
but obviously that's a different question. It wasn't an option we had for ourselves, was it? So yeah, I mean, as I said before, these aren't my sort of armies. I think it's interesting. I as you'll see later, I've got Vikings in my list, and I just didn't consider the Berserkers. I didn't want the forced charge at 3 base widths. You're obviously far more comfortable with that than I am.
It's in the lap of the gods. Then it can't possibly be my fault if I can't stop them charging.
Yeah, and actually, I think part of that reason was I hadn't clocked their superior.
Yeah. I think they add an interesting punch to that front rank.
I think it is. Yeah, I suppose the downside might be the prevalence of shield wall. Which, you can, in the context of these early medieval Dark Age armies, you can end up facing a lot of shield wall.
It does boost your factor though on the impact, and I mean I'd almost be tempted, being formed, to break off, take the cab test, even if it is a yellow, lose the herd from the back, and then charge back in again against shield walls.
Yeah, I suppose depending if you haven't taken too much damage.
Yeah,
let's
just force the issue, because you can always lose the average off the back for that cab test, and you're throwing the superiors back in. So
but
maybe
I can see opponents really wanting to attack the Irish part of the army.
Oh, they'd be the target I'd put in the middle and hope they'd go for it, whilst hopefully the Vikings can hit a flank. Or
they're the bait.
They're the bait.
Yeah. You do have to be careful though, because you've got 5 units of bait and you break on 5 units.
It will be reworked.
What could possibly go wrong?
And when people listen to this and look at the blog, they may or may not see a revised army on there. We'll definitely put the one Matt's just described up, but if he if he sends an alternative one to me before it's all published, we'll get that up as well. Okay, Matt, thanks for that. Shall I go on to my army, since I've sort of trailed little bits a bit before? I went for the early Scots, so this is King Constantine, leading his army to try and get away from Athelstan's domination, so he can no longer be a subordinate king to his English overlord. So I would say it's early Scots army. I've gone for 3 allies in this army. One of which, as Simon gave you a bit of spoiler early, is an internal Galwegian ally. So anyway, the command composition is a competent, instinctive army commander, a talented, instinctive Viking ally. The Galwegian ally is internal but also talented, and then a competent, instinctive Strathclyde British ally, which comes from the later post-Roman army list, which Richard explained that earlier. So as this army, as you'll see, doesn't contain much that provides scouting, and I only have a competent C&C, so my PBS is 5 with a scouting of 1. So Matt's obviously significantly outclassed me on that one already with his legendary general. I would say I did consider a legendary general, and then decided no, because my first thought was, oh, that means I get a better chance of dictating how the battlefield might look in the PBS sequence. But I decided that, given the composition, which I'll come to shortly, I really needed the 2 talented, instinctive allies. Same reason as Matt had for his Vikings being talented. You really, really want them to play, and I really want my Vikings to play, and I really want the Galwegians to play. Partly because I think they could be effective, and partly because I think they could just be good, damned fun. So we'll come to those, and what listeners can't see is Simon nodding and smiling when I said that.
They are definitely fun, yes.
Yes, I think it's definitely, sort of my version of lunatics. Okay, so the Scottish part of the list is 3 units of spearmen who are tribal close, average protect. Sorry, 2 of them are average protected, 1 is poor protected. Short spear, shield wall, and the poor one is also combat shy. They're all 8s, which meets the list minimum. The one that's downgraded was downgraded to create points for other things in the list. So that's one of those things. It's got one better unit, which is the Scottish Thanes, who are formed close, superior protected, short spear, shield wall. But they're only a 6. You can only have a 6 of those. So that's the entirety. It's the entirety of King Constantine's own Scottish troops. Probably not entirely historical. I'm sure the army had far more Scots than that. The internal Galwegian contingent, who I suppose could be our Scots, are 3 tugs, each of 9 bases. They are tribal loose, average, unprotected, devastating charger, fleet of foot, melee expert. So 56 points a base. So 9 bases for 504 points is pretty good value. So 3 units of those, led by a talented general. They should be playing, and they're an assault troop basically. They point at something and charge. I suppose if looking at Matt's army, if I could charge those into his Irish warriors, his basic Irish warriors, as long as he didn't roll lots and lots of good shooting dice with his javelin into my unprotected, I think I could do horrible things to them very quickly. And the melee expert in them obviously means that it sort of cancels out the fact they're unprotected when you get to the melee phase. Okay, the Viking ally, 3 units of mixed Huskarls and Herd. Again, I've gone for chunky 9 base units. 3 bases of form flexible, superior protected, 2-handed cut and crush Huskarls, and 6 of form flexible, average protected short spear. So not quite as much quality troops as Matt's Vikings, but they're slightly larger, so a bit more, maybe a bit more staying power. I did it about having 4 and 4 mix on those, because that would still keep them within the 12 Huskarl limit that Matt mentioned for mixed units. But in the end, decided, no, I'll go for the big units, go for a bit of a grind. The last part of the army is the Strathclyde British. That's got compulsory spearmen. I've got 2 units of those. One is a 9 base unit again, of tribal flexible average protected short spear. That's it, nothing else. And a 6 base unit of tribal flexible poor protected short spear combat shy. Again, downgraded, gets me a 13th tug for not a lot of points. The slightly different unit in this one is a 6 base unit of cavalry formed loose, superior protected, unskilled javelin, short spear, shoot and charge, dismountable. To be honest, the dismountable's only there because the points. I wanted to get 1 unit of cavalry into the army to really have something that's quite mobile, possibly as a bit of a fire brigade, or just possibly for being able to scoot round somewhere. Unfortunately, in some ways, it's ended up in the Strathclyde ally, who's only got a competent instinctive, so he's got a bigger chance of not being reliable. So I could lose that, but it's not the end of the world. I think this army is going to depend on punching with the Galwegians and hopefully the Vikings as well, and then a certain amount of grind with the rest. It's not going to do anything clever, except maybe very occasionally with that 1 unit of cavalry. So there we are. Comments, please.
I'd really like those Galwegians to charge straight into those integral shooters that I've got on the Vikings.
I would not want them to be doing that. Although that really would be a cross my fingers and hope I get a shatter.
Yeah. And that would still only be a green fight.
Yeah, yes, exactly. The best you can turn into is not a lot. No,
no, it's yeah.
Yeah, I think Galwegians charging through the woods is definitely the way to go with that, isn't it?
Or if you get Galwegians through a woods, so even if they are charging something like Matt's Irish warriors who've got the experienced javelin and they're obviously unprotected, at least it keeps them down to a white dice, because we're shooting through cover, through forest even, then they wouldn't really shoot at all.
Yes.
But that's where you need your forest. Can I persuade you to put your Irish in a forest, Matt?
Don't tempt me. Those black slows will keep you there forever.
Oh, that would just guarantee every black would get something, wouldn't it? So.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot to kill. In theme, that would be a real tough one to roll over, I think. I mean, it would all depend on the Galwegians, I would think.
I think its chances to win could depend heavily on the Galwegians, which is another reason I did wonder about the legendary general, to try and push the PBS up to possibly invade, maximise the chances of seeing the opponent's army. Although the scouting of 1,
I was going to say, good luck with
which I think even with a legendary general, it stayed at a scouting of 1, which was one factor of me deciding, nah. See, Matt's got those sneaky skirmishers in, which pushes him into a 2 for scouting. So,
yes,
so that was another reason I went, no, I won't bother with the legendary. Partly because the legendary can't lead the Galwegians. If the legendary could lead the Galwegians, that might be a different calculation. So, anyway, sorry, other thoughts on this magnificent pile of men?
It is what it is.
I am impressed by the fact it seems to have just about every type of short spear version you can have. Tribal close short spear, shield wall, tribal flexible short spear, and so on and so forth. It's great.
It's just the way it worked out. But it really isn't the sort of army I would go for. But again, that's another reason to put the Galwegians in, to add a bit of something to it. So, okay, maybe move on to Richard, to the victorious Anglo-Saxons.
Yes, well, I have to say as I've already mentioned, the Middle Anglo-Saxon list probably lacks variety. So here goes. So I went with 4 generals, talented instinctive army commander, talented instinctive internal ally, and 2 competent instinctive subs. So I've gone fairly high on the cards. Poor unfortified camp, 9 tugs, 4 tugs, 1 allied, 3 normal, consisting of 4 herd and 4 select feared. The herd are form close, superior, protected, short spear, shield wall, shove, melee expert, and the select feared are tribal close, average, protected, short spear, shield wall, and shove. So yeah, you're paying for formed when you actually only get the benefits of tribal, but that's one of the drawbacks of having the mixed units. Along with that, I have 5 units of just plain select feared, tribal close, average, protected, short spear, shield wall, shove. This is an army of short spear, shield wall, and shove, basically. All the units are 8, and accompanying them are 3 units of skirmishers, 1 of scouts who are average, unprotected, experienced javelin in a 6, and 2 units of archers, 1 I made allied, average, unprotected, experienced bow, combat shy. The allied one is oh no, they're both 9s, and that's the army. 6 cards, PBS, 2 scouting. It's your pretty typical stolid line them up and roll some good dice. Early medieval army.
Yeah. So would you play that almost like a, because there's so much shield wall in it, you want the enemy to charge you, don't you?
Yeah, it's that's possibly why you need the high cards, because you want to get close to the enemy, but then have them charge you ideally. But it depends on what you're facing, obviously.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd probably try and get those skirmishers in front of those unprotected troops in those enemy armies to see how much damage I can do before they get trampled, presumably, by the fleet of foot.
Yeah.
And then prod away. Basically, is what you do with a spear, isn't it? Prod and keep prodding.
Poke them
until they run away.
Yeah,
I think that must be one of the few armies where I've ever seen shove combined with no melee weapon. I mean, you usually shove on pikes and long spears and stuff like that, but shove with nothing else with it. It's just wow. It's kind of blown my mind a bit. And those tribal foot really make it difficult to hold your front line if you want them to hit you. I mean,
that's why you need all the cards that are going.
yes, absolutely.
Does he say, compared to a number of those Dark Ages troops, the fact the herd have got the melee expert? But yeah, I suppose it's similar to the two-handed cut and crush with the Viking Huskarls, isn't it? Just that they got shove in there as well. Does make it interesting. Because I think the armies we've got, you're going to get a lot of green dice because there's a lot of very similar troops. So
the shield wall counts as the shove, though, doesn't it? So if your opponent's got shield wall, then like you say, it's another reason to get them to charge you, isn't it?
Does it cancel shove? Oh, I thought it was only shatter. It cancels.
No, I think it's both.
I thought it was both, but
it could be. It could be just. I'm not sure I use that many armies that have got it. Actually, thinking about. Yeah, no, you're probably right. I just always think of it in terms of stopping shatter and mounted melee expert.
Yeah.
So it's might well stop shove.
Shield 2+ deep shield wall cancels all opposing shatter and shove results.
There you are.
He says, reading from the rules.
Reading from the rules. There's a hint, listeners.
There's a
Reading
note.
from the rules can really help you if you've got questions. Yeah. But equally shows how easy it is to miss some bits. Because when he said that, I really thought, is that true? Yeah. I suppose, it must be, because it's the logic is that it's a big tight formation, isn't it? So it's resistant as well as pushing forward. So you get two shield walls shoving at each other, going nowhere.
Yeah, I thought as a bit of an alternative, you might want to have a look at one of the lists that we did in the battle. So if we have a look at the Waynes, so which is the Strathclyde contingent, that might give you another little variation.
Yeah, go on, run through that.
Again, not particularly exciting, but a little variation.
Yeah.
So it is purely Strathclyde. So we've got no allies in here at all. Okay. So we've got 4 commanders, all of them competent in instinctive. Okay. And the first 3 tugs, you've got Hearthguard, and they are infantry form flexible, superior protected, unskilled javelin with short spear. Okay. And then we've got a massive block of just standard tribal flexible spearmen. Okay, so we've got 7 tugs of
8
even.
Just the bog standard.
So many of them beyond spearmen beyond number.
Spearmen beyond count. Okay, but then we've got a bunch of soaks with them. So they're the things that make it a little bit different. So we've got archers, a couple of loads of javelin men, slingers, and some light cavalry. So the idea with this particular army is you deploy the spearmen as a massive block in the center, and you try and make it as deep as possible. Yeah, so if you can deploy them, I think it's still legal to be 2 ranks wide and 4 deep.
Yes, 8s can do that. Yeah.
Yeah. So you do basically rank them all up in the center. You can use your Hearthguard as because of the unskilled javelin. I think that means they don't have the force charge within 1 base width.
That's correct. Yeah.
So basically, you can march them up to your enemy that are in shield wall and start peppering them with unskilled javelin, and trying to get them to force charge you. Yeah. In which case they lose their shield wall. Yeah. And I think if you can get some of the archers and javelin and slingers can go out in front of your own spearmen, but when they have to retire back behind them, you can potentially wheel them round the flanks. And if the enemy are also 4 deep, I believe they can shoot at the rear ranks because they count as unengaged, I think, for spear.
Yes.
As long as they're behind the front line and the nearest base isn't one that's engaged, then yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it gives you a little bit of extra usage for your skirmishers, presuming that they don't get run down in the early stages of the game. Yeah. So that's it's just another slightly different variation, and
I think
around the Strathclyde's just a little bit different.
Yeah, I think I'd see that as potentially a bit weaker in its fighting troops than some, but you got the Sugs, which do make a difference. So, Richard, Matt,
I wouldn't want to paint it.
It's a lot of basic spearmen, isn't it?
It is.
At my painting speed, it would take me years.
It's a sort of trying to do variety in all those shields.
Yeah.
Yes,
was keeping them within just sort of dark ages.
Yeah,
really, isn't it?
I did have to paint them. I bought 3 boxes of the War Games Atlantic Goth spearmen, and kind of used them with a few head swaps, and that's a big chunk of inventory. Yeah, don't underestimate the number of just bog standard spearmen that you have to buy and paint for a Dark Age army. There's just lots.
Yeah, 8 base units, 8 of them.
Yeah,
with 4 figures of base. If you
that's 256 for those whose maths isn't up to it.
That's just no. I don't want to do that.
My previous comment about wargamers and
and then there's the 3/6 base Hearthguard. I think if you go through all of those, even a 9 base Sug, which is only 18 figures, will start feeling more and more. It's a lot of painting, but I suppose one of the things about this period is to have a big wodge, isn't it? A big mass.
Yeah, it's kind of hammer and anvil, but you haven't got a very big hammer. That's the only problem.
It is. There's challenges in this.
I think the theme through all the armies is it's buckets of dice.
Yes.
Basically, that's how the games are going to go down. That's going to be buckets of dice. It'll either be whites and whites, or white and greens, or greens and greens. Yeah.
I think so. Yeah, I think it's attritional warfare, because I think even back to my list, the Galwegians, you sort of cross your fingers, hope they can do something, but if they don't, or if they run into your Huskarls, and they're looking for the 1 in 6 for the shatter just to get them up to greens. Attritional warfare, I think, which I suppose is probably quite historical.
Yeah, I think there's one book I was read talking about tactics in the period, and they described the shield wall almost like a phalanx, and if you would, the problem that you had, because you have to match the enemy's line. If you didn't have enough troops, then your shield wall wouldn't be deep enough, and therefore that's the point that it would break. And I think there's definitely an element of that in MeG. You got to try and get your units as deep as possible so they survive long enough.
Yeah, you got to ride out any problems and just keep grinding away, haven't you?
I think within a tightly restricted theme, I think you can actually have some quite interesting games, but it's certainly not for everyone's taste, that's for sure. And these sort of armies don't tend to do terribly well in wider ranging themes.
Yeah.
I think I don't think they would fare well against a Mongol army. I don't think.
No. I wouldn't entirely. Well, it depends which one, because some of those horse archer armies can be quite small.
Yeah.
I was going to say, actually, it's the slightly larger horse archer armies that would worry me more than if I felt actually came up against the sort of all skilled shooting Mongols. I don't think there are actually enough of them, so you actually just basically form a line and push forward rapidly and drive the Mongols off the table. Can always go wrong, because those greens can always throw those nasty skulls, but
indeed. And I think that last army Simon demonstrated with extra skirmishers, my army would suffer most, I think, against, because I've got no real missile power.
Skirmishers are your friends against horse archers.
Indeedy. Okie dokie. So there we are, folks. There's some armies and some thoughts at the end. But I think I would agree that a sort of heavily themed tournament that did cut out armies that were too different from these sort of things could be quite interesting. And maybe not something I'd want to do every week, personally. But then again, not just my preferences. I'm sure there are people out there who really want to. And obviously, Simon and the Luton Lancers had great fun doing the battle whose name I keep avoiding, because
Brunanburh.
Because partly because I keep forgetting it, and partly because I don't want to mangle it too much. Okie dokie, folks. I don't know if we've sort of come to the end. We did ask for listeners' questions on this. I'm not sure where we stand, as whether we will have answered some of those. But yeah, Richard, if you're on top of it.
I'll run through. So Simon asked, why do we call it the Dark Ages? Well, we don't anymore. I think it's probably fair to say. I think it was referring to the lack of literature. So it's dark in the sense of not having a great deal of information. But these days, pretty much all academics and even quite a lot of the more general public, I think, now refer to it as the early medieval period rather than the Dark Ages. He also asked, was it really darker? Well, probably when the volcanoes in Iceland erupted and threw dust over the atmosphere, then technically it probably was a bit darker. But other than that, no. I mean, pre-Victorian era, then the country was pretty dark most of the time at night. Electric lighting and so on has really transformed the world that way. Did people live less well? Arguably, there was a lot of plague that went round in this period. So arguably that wasn't a good thing. But in some ways, it depends really how you assess people living less well. Did they live longer? That often depended on things like diet, but generally, yes, they didn't live particularly long lives, but that was true throughout much of the ancient period. Yeah, diet was an effect, is an influence more than anything in terms of general health, probably.
Sorry, can I just chip in on something in this as well? Yeah, because you're saying about the Dark Ages, the term due to lack of written evidence, and I think also maybe some harking back to the golden age of Rome. And things, but I would also say, that the period that was classified the Dark Ages, that was very much looking at a parochial Western European.
Oh, indeed,
thing.
Absolutely.
I suppose the term comes in when Western Europe is on the up. Really, I think it's the late to Middle Ages it first starts being used. I think, could be wrong on that, but certainly popularized.
I would argue Dark Ages actually was also a very Western Europe orientated thing. So yes, and Britain in particular. I mean, you can argue actually for much of the rest of the world it wasn't particularly regressive period at all.
Yeah, I mean, various parts. So you have to be careful about describing it as that. Wild generalizations, and even within Western Europe, if we take it to start with the end of the Western Roman Empire, whilst Britain, which is always on the periphery of the Roman Empire, probably did go downhill quite badly in the 4th and 5th centuries. Italy, until it was wrecked by the prolonged wars when Justinian tried to reconquer it, was probably carried on very similar to mid to early 4th century Roman.
Indeed, but, yes.
Yeah. Anyway, that's me digressing. I'll let you get back to the questions.
Lawrence asked, are armies of mostly average tribal protected short spear nothing any good? To which the answer is probably not. They are what they are, frankly. Yeah. You don't have variety. They're a bit of a one-track pony, and they're not even a particularly strong one-trick pony, are they? Richard Morgan asked, were there any particular differences between the Anglo-Saxon armies of the Thanes and King compared to their usual foes? To which the answer is probably not a great deal. Basically, as I mentioned, you recruited anybody who was capable of using a spear, and the Hearthguard of the Welsh or the Thanes, or however you describe them, probably weren't that different between the different armies. He also asked, what's the current thinking of how the armies formed up? Basically, as far as I'm aware, unless there've been any studies I'm not aware of, you put your best guys at the front, surrounded your king with your best guard, and everybody else piled in behind. It wasn't particularly renowned. There are no treatises on Anglo-Saxon tactics, as far as I'm aware.
I think you just summarised them.
Yes, there's 600 years of warfare summarised in one sentence.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think as Simon mentioned earlier, you sort of match the length of your opponent's line, don't you, as well, and hope you've got enough men.
Yeah, indeed. And if you didn't, you probably stuck yourself up behind whatever burg or fort you could find. Hubas, many armies from that era would crumble as soon as their CNC fell. Would that be interesting to integrate that idea, and how could it be done? I'm not necessarily entirely convinced by the assumption that armies would crumble as soon as their commander-in-chief fell. Often I suspect the commander-in-chief fell when the army was breaking, and that's why he fell, because he couldn't get away. I don't think as a game idea it's particularly good to have the CNC killed, causing too much damage to the army, not least because it would discourage people from fighting with the commanders, which in some armies would be entirely valid, but in others wouldn't be, and particularly in this period. And yeah, so I think the balance in MEG is fairly reasonable, to be honest.
I noticed this question. I think who did put it on the WhatsApp group? Matt, I remember you had an idea about how you might do it that wouldn't be necessarily catastrophic. That could be.
Yeah. Basically, if the army commander dies, all sub-generals immediately become allied generals and effectively lose all their cards. So the next turn you redeal the cards as if it's the first turn for allied generals, and you just turn them face up. So you've got the chance that they'll either be, unwilling to play further, or in fact be actually so dispirited you're actually taking cab tests on them because you've got 3 blacks or whatever. And if you have an external or an internal allied general already, they just same again. Starts you redeal the cards, but you deal them 1 less for the first turn, increasing the odds that they actually really don't want to play, and carry on from there, basically.
I think it could be interesting in a scenario game.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, I mean, we did consider doing something like that in our Brunanburh refight. Decided not to, because we didn't see anything in there, because there were a lot of the leaders that died in that battle. Like I said, Constantine's son died, Owain died, and several of the Norse Jarls died, and no one seems to be citing the death of one of those leaders as the reason why the army broke. So
yeah, I think it sort of fits in what Richard was saying, doesn't it? Yeah, maybe they died when their part of the line was beaten. So it was a factor of rather than cause.
I suspect it's actually the other parts of the line that break, and the bit with the general doesn't break and suddenly finds itself, it can't get out of there.
Yeah.
And that's when the leader dies, actually. That's my theory. I've got no evidence to support that. But there you go.
Maybe who would like to do a bit more research on that one for us?
Indeed.
Yeah. Okay, one more question, I think, Paul.
And the final question was from Paul, who this is actually aimed at slightly earlier. And he's asking, there's a lot of recent thinking suggesting that the Anglo-Saxon colonization of post-Roman Britain was more peaceful, in that the Anglo-Saxons came along and basically took over unoccupied land, and also perhaps married into the aristocracies of post-Roman Britain. And he then asked, do I think that warfare was more or less common than other post-Roman states? I think certainly there is growing evidence that there are quite a large number of places where the Anglo-Saxons colonized Britain without any evidence of conflict whatsoever. They've done extensive studies in a tract in North Yorkshire, for example, which sort of proves that point. But that said, certainly there was conflict, and towards the end of the 6th century, there clearly was quite a lot of major conflict in the collapse of the post-Roman states in England, leading to the establishment of the Saxon and Mercian kingdoms that then survived through till the Danish invasions. So I don't think my view is that warfare it's very hard to find anywhere where warfare was more or less common. What you do get is examples where, and I think the Mongols are a particularly good example of this, where warfare becomes more vicious. And you look at the campaigns of Timur, and supposedly 30 million people died from the result of his campaigns. So it's the outcome of the warfare that sometimes becomes more vicious.
Okay. Thanks for that, Richard.
The other thing worth saying, of course, is a lot of Britons fled across the Channel to Brittany. And that's where we get Great Britain from, because the ones that went across to Brittany is actually Little Britain. That's what the name means.
Not just a TV show.
Indeed.
Okay,
yeah, they got that all wrong, didn't they?
Yeah. Damn, can't get anything right. Thank you very much, Richard. Okay, I think we've reached the end of that. We've been we've going for nearly 2 hours now. This time seems to have flown by. So I don't know if you've got any other business. Other than the usual mention of upcoming competitions, I haven't got any. There's the Devisers competition in mid-July, but I believe that's sold out. And the one after that would be, in the UK, would be BritCon. Mid-August. You can still buy tickets. You can still attend that if you wish. So if you want to go to BritCon in Nottingham, please buy a ticket.
Sorry, prior to attack, there will be demo games of MeG, Reg and Cannon and Rifles at the Joy of Six Backer show at Sheffield, which is taking place in is it the 6th, 7th, something like that of.
14th.
Sorry, 14th.
14th.
Sorry, yeah, I've got completely wrong. 14th of July.
Yeah.
Thank you, Simon. Simon and myself will both be there, I believe.
Yeah. Flying the flag for 6 mil, MeG, Reg, and ACW. I keep forgetting the name of the rules, Richard.
Cannons and rifles.
Cannons and rifles. Thank you.
Okie dokie. So there we are. Yeah. And so the other competition I'm mentioning in the UK is the very last weekend of August, first weekend of September, 31st of August, 1st of September, Chariots of Fire at Boards and Swords in Derby. It is what it says. Basically a, quote, biblical theme competition. So I will most certainly be there. Okay, don't know if anybody's got anything else, or whether we can say that's it, folks.
Just I'm list checker for BritCon, so anybody who fancies sending me a list early rather than making my last week before BritCon hell, or last 2 weeks before BritCon hell, get them in.
Yep, Matt's email address for sending lists to is on the announcement on the forum. So, yeah, make his life easy. Send him in early, early and often.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, I think we've written. So thank you very much, obviously, as ever, to Richard and Matt, and a special thank you to Simon for coming along and sharing his experiences of refighting the Battle of Brunanburh.
Thanks for inviting me, Nick. It's been great fun.
So, and hopefully we'll see people around the country at various times. So thank you.